Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome to the deep dive.
Hey there.
This is where we take your sources, all the articles, reports, everything you send, and really dig into what matters.
Yep.
Today, we're doing a deep dive into the Philippines, looking at that week of June 2nd to June 6th, 2025. What was really going on?
And our mission, as always, is pretty simple. Cut through the noise, pull out those key nuggets, those important insights from the material you gave us.
Right, to get the clearest picture possible.
Exactly. Based purely on the sources.
And looking at these sources, it was quite a week. We're seeing big political moves, lots of talk about the economy, typhoon season kicking off, and those ongoing security issues.
A lot happening all at once.
Okay.
And hanging over the end of the week, you had the Eid holiday on June 6th. President Marcos Jr. put out a message, calling for reflection on strengthening the nation.
Which feels kind of pointed, doesn't it, given everything else going on?
It does. That message about sacrifice, building a stronger nation, it definitely resonates differently when you look at the political tensions playing out.
Yeah, like it has a double meaning almost.
Absolutely. And speaking of those tensions, the biggest political story really has to be the impeachment process against Vice President Sara Duterte.
Right. Okay, so quick recap from the sources. The House voted to impeach her way back on February 5th.
Uh-huh.
Charges included high crimes, and a lot of the focus was on how her office handled those confidential funds.
That's the one.
Mm-mm.
So the next constitutional step is the Senate trial. The Senate basically becomes an impeachment court.
And that trial's supposed to start June 2nd, but didn't.
Correct. It was initially penciled in for June 2nd, yeah.
Yeah.
But Senate President Francis Ches Escudero moved it.
Okay, why?
He cited, needing to prioritize other legislative stuff before Congress adjourned. So the new date became June 11th.
That 4-month gap between the House vote and the scheduled trial start, people noticed that, right?
Oh, definitely. It drew quite a bit of attention, that perceived delay.
And then, adding to the drama, VP Duterte flew back to the Philippines on June 5th, just as this new trial date was looming.
Right. And we saw some quite strong calls for the Senate to, get on with it.
From who?
Faculty members from the law schools at UP, University of the Philippines, and also De La Salle. They put out statements.
What were they saying?
Basically urging the Senate, do your constitutional duty. They were also worried about reports that some senators might try to draft resolutions to just dismiss the whole case.
Dismiss it. On what grounds? Something about a right to a speedy trial.
Yeah, the right to speedy disposition of cases. But the law faculties argued that doesn't really apply here.
How come?
Their point, based on the sources, is that impeachment is sui generis. It's unique. It's a special constitutional thing, not like a regular criminal case.
I see.
So you can't just toss it out because of delays, they argue. The Constitution says the Senate has to conduct the trial. That's the obligation.
So the job is the job, regardless of the clock ticking down to adjournment. Makes sense. Were the senators themselves split on this?
Very much so. You had Senator Bato de la Rosa suggesting, maybe just junk the charges. There isn't enough time.
Okay.
But then Senator Sherwin Gatchalian countered that, saying, no, holding the trial is a constitutional duty. It's not optional.
And the House prosecutors were ready to go?
Yep. A lawmaker was quoted on June 6th saying they were prepared to present the articles no matter what. And President Marcos Jr. reportedly signaled he wasn't going to step in.
So this whole thing really puts the Senate in a tight spot, doesn't it?
Definitely. You've got their clear constitutional role versus, the political realities, the calendar.
Mm-hmm.
The House sent the case over. The Senate's job is to hear it.
And if they find a way around a full trial?
Well, the sources suggest that could be seen as, avoiding their responsibility for public accountability.
Yeah.
It could damage their credibility, set a bad precedent maybe.
Yeah, especially with headlines claiming someone has the numbers to kill the trial. That really points to heavy politics behind the scenes.
It does. And at the core of the impeachment articles, that $125 million in confidential funds, allegedly spent in just 11 days after she took office. That seems like the most concrete thing the prosecution can latch onto.
The specific allegation about breaking fiscal rules.
Right. And how this specific issue is handled, it could really, lead to more scrutiny on confidential funds across the board in the future, more focus on transparency and government spending.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Stepping away from the domestic impeachment drama, there was also movement on the international front, specifically with the ICC.
Yes, the International Criminal Court's investigation concerning former President Rodrigo Duterte. That continued to develop.
What happened there this week?
The ICC prosecution submitted more evidence, their 6th batch actually, on June 3rd. It was quite a bit, 90 items.
And the sources mentioned something specific about that batch, like barangay clearance operations?
That's right. The focus on barangay clearance operations and contextual elements, well, it suggests a strategy.
Which is?
It looks like they're trying to methodically build a case showing a pattern, linking alleged extrajudicial killings not just as isolated incidents, but as potentially systematic actions connected to the state right down at the community level, trying to strengthen that crimes against humanity argument.
And there are deadlines coming up for this.
There are. The prosecution needs to disclose all their evidence by July 1st,
Yeah.
and then the big hearing, the confirmation of charges, is set for September 23rd.
Okay. But then something else happened this week involving the ICC, didn't it? Something external.
Yes, that was quite unexpected. The U.S., the Trump administration, decided to impose sanctions on 4 ICC judges.
Why? What was that about?
It was related to the court looking into actions by Israeli and U.S. personnel in other cases. But the key thing for the Philippines—
Is that one of those judges is also on the Duterte case?
exactly. Judge Rain Adelaide Sophie Alapini Gansu. She's one of the judges involved in the Philippines situation.
Wow. How did the ICC react to the U.S. sanctions?
They reacted strongly, put out a statement on June 5th, basically denouncing the sanctions,
Right.
said it just encourages impunity and that the court wouldn't be deterred.
So this adds a whole new layer, doesn't it? You've got this international court looking at a former Philippine president, and now a superpower is sanctioning one of the judges on the panel.
It really complicates things. Even though the sanctions aren't about the Duterte case specifically, the fact that Judge Gansu is involved means this U.S. action becomes tangled up in the whole narrative.
Yeah, I can see how supporters might use it to question the ICC, claim it's under pressure.
Or, flip side, human rights advocates might say it just shows why international courts are needed, especially if powerful countries try to interfere with accountability. It muddies the waters, definitely affects public perception, maybe even diplomatic stuff for the Philippines.
And just quickly, the sources also mentioned a procedural point about witnesses.
Oh, right. Just that the ICC pretrial chamber had previously okayed delaying the disclosure of witness identities until that July 1st deadline, mainly due to safety concerns for them.
Okay. Let's turn now to the economy. The sources painted a kind of mixed picture this week.
Yeah, mixed is a good word for it. Some good signals, but also some worrying signs, especially around jobs and how people are feeling.
So what did the latest job numbers show?
The PSA, the Philippine Statistics Authority, released the April 2025 labor figures on June 6th. Unemployment actually picked up a bit.
To what?
To 4.1% in April. That's up from 3.9 in March and slightly up from 4.0 a year ago. So about 2.06 million Filipinos looking for work.
And underemployment. People with jobs but needing more hours?
That went up too, climbed to 14.6% in April from 13.4% the month before. That's, over 7 million people.
Wow. And were there shifts between different types of jobs?
Big ones, actually. The sources highlighted a loss of about 410,000 jobs in manufacturing.
Ouch. Where did people go?
Well, there was a gain of around 394,000 jobs in administrative and support services. So, a significant shift.
How did the government see these numbers?
DEB, the Economic Planning Agency, they acknowledged some challenges like, the skills mismatch between education and available jobs. But they still maintained the overall employment rate was high and generally on track with their plans.
Okay, so that's the job picture. But there was definitely some good news on the economy, right? Inflation.
Absolutely. That was the big positive. Inflation in May slowed way down to just 1.3%.
1.3. That's low.
Really low. The slowest it's been in almost 6 years, actually, since late 2019. So, great news on price stability.
But here's the twist.
Here's the twist the sources picked up on. Despite that super low inflation, consumer confidence apparently went down in June.
Down? Why?
Well, some reports were linking it directly to all the political drama we were just talking about.
That's fascinating. So prices are stable, but people are still feeling uneasy because of politics.
It seems that way. It suggests that, low inflation is good, but maybe it doesn't make people feel secure if they're worried about their jobs or their income or just the general stability of the country, the impeachment, the ICC stuff. It seems to be casting a shadow.
And maybe those job numbers feed into it too. Losing manufacturing jobs, even if other jobs are created, might feel less secure for people.
Could be. Quality of jobs, stability. That all plays into confidence. Which brings us neatly back to that big debate this week. The P200 minimum wage hike proposal.
Ah, yes, the wage hike bill. The House passed their version, right? HB 13176 for a P200 daily increase.
They did, and they framed it as a pretty big deal. First national legislated hike in, what, 36 years?
What was President Marcos Jr.'s take on it?
Cautious. He said he'd look into the economic implications, wanted something fair and practical, and mentioned considering the regional wage boards that already exist.
And the Senate had a different number in mind.
They did. They'd earlier approved a smaller P100 increase. Senator Villanueva actually voiced concern that P200 might be too much, maybe get vetoed, and felt P100 was more convenient and practical.
So now they have to sort out the difference.
Right, in a bicameral committee.
Yeah.
They've got a deadline of June 13th, but the business community came out swinging against the P200 hike.
Which groups?
The big ones, PCCI, the Chamber of Commerce, ECOP, Employers Confederation, MBC, Makati Business Club.
And what were they worried about?
A whole list of things. Higher inflation, hurting small businesses, SMEs the most, job losses, especially maybe in the informal sector, making the Philippines less competitive in ASEAN, and basically undermining the whole regional wage board system.
So going back to those job numbers again, unemployment up, underemployment up. The business warnings about job losses from a big wage hike suddenly sound, well, pretty serious.
It really puts the dilemma in focus, doesn't it? You want to help workers, obviously. But if you raise wages too high too fast, especially for smaller businesses, the risk is they cut jobs or maybe even close down, which could make the overall employment situation worse.
And the whole idea of a national hike ignores the regional differences, right? Which is what the RTWPBs are supposed to handle.
That's the core argument against it, a one-size-fits-all approach. Critics say P200 might be unaffordable in poorer regions, or maybe still not enough in expensive places like Manila. Proponents, though, feel those regional boards just haven't done enough. They've been too slow.
Okay, besides the wage debate, what else was happening economically, according to the sources?
Let's see. Stock market was a bit up and down. Some gains early on, maybe linked to the good inflation news, pushing the PSEI near 6,400, but also some dips later, maybe on growth worries or nervousness about trade tariffs.
Any good news on the macro front?
Yes. JCRA, that's a credit rating agency, they affirmed the Philippines A rating with a stable outlook. That's a positive signal.
We also saw some specific company news mentioned.
Yeah, GrabPH launching electric taxis. Jollibee had a meeting coming up. Energy sector was busy too. A new DOE $300 million efficiency plan, Morocco rate updates, and 22 power companies being asked to explain why they weren't generating in full capacity.
And manufacturing.
Activity slowed down in May. Sources mentioned weaker output and less demand from overseas.
Trade news.
Yeah, the Philippines is exploring importing rice from India and Thailand, trying not to rely so heavily on Vietnam. And apparently they were pretty happy with how trade talks with the U.S. were going.
Okay, so quick summary of those key economic points. Unemployment, 4.1%, underemployment, 14.6%, but inflation way down at 1.3%. Credit rating solid at A stable. And this huge debate about the P200 wage hike set against those job losses in manufacturing.
That covers the main economic spreads from the week.
All right, let's pivot slightly to national security and foreign affairs. Still a lot going on there, particularly in the West Philippine Sea.
Absolutely. Asserting Philippine rights and just maintaining presence there. It's a constant focus and a constant challenge.
The sources mentioned the Aten Ito civilian convoy heading to Pag-asa Island.
Yes, and as of June 5th, it was reportedly being shadowed by 2 Chinese Coast Guard ships.
And China's official stance hasn't changed.
Not at all. Their foreign ministry criticized the EU for, quote, interfering, and repeated the line that no external force should get involved. There was also that Rappler report about an alleged Chinese info campaign trying to paint the Philippines as the aggressor.
And actual encounters at sea.
The Philippine Navy reportedly challenged a Chinese warship near Panata Island. That's, part of the ongoing pattern.
Right, like this incident the week before with the water cannons.
Exactly. The National Maritime Council, the NMC, had condemned China for using water cannons and interfering with Philippine research vessels near Pag-asa Cay just back on May 21st.
The NMC also talked about planning another legal case against China.
They did, back in May. Said they were working to make sure a second international case would be foolproof.
And there are efforts to help Filipino fishermen in the area, too.
Yeah, a plan for a government-funded boat to basically act as a go-between, helping them sell their catch directly to buyers out there.
So it looks like the Philippines is using a mix of tactics, civilian missions, diplomatic protests, legal groundwork, strengthening alliances.
It's definitely multifaceted. Meanwhile, China sticks to its gray zone tactics. the diplomatic warnings, the info ops. It's a tense, complex situation, always with that risk of escalation. Philippines is clearly trying to rally international support without sparking a fight, while China isn't backing down.
What about other international ties this week?
Well, there were the 7th Joint Maritime Drills with the U.S., and that defense agreement with Japan, the Reciprocal Access Agreement, got approved by Japan's upper house, the House of Counselors.
And we have to loop back to those U.S. sanctions on the ICC judges again, right? Because that's a foreign policy issue, too.
It is. Because of Judge Gansu's involvement in the Duterte case, it really shows how these big global power plays can ripple outwards and affect the Philippines' strategic environment.
How so?
Well, think about it. The Philippines bases its West Philippine Sea, claims heavily on international law, on UNCLOS. So when a major power like the U.S. takes actions that challenge international legal bodies, like the ICC, even in a different context.
It could be seen as weakening the whole idea of a rules-based order.
Potentially, yeah.
Yeah.
Even though the U.S. supports the Philippines and the WPS, actions like the ICC sanctions might send kind of mixed signals about their overall commitment to these international mechanisms. It makes the diplomatic balancing act for the Philippines even trickier.
Okay. Shifting now to the weather. Looks like typhoon season really arrived this week.
It certainly did. Pagasa, the Weather Bureau, was watching a low-pressure area, an LPA, very closely all week.
What was the progression?
On June 5th, it was still outside the Philippine Area of Responsibility, PAR. Low chance of becoming anything serious then. But predictions were already flying that it could enter PR on the 6th and maybe become Oring, the first cyclone of the year.
And did it?
By Friday morning, June 6th, Pagasa said it was near or just inside PR. Chance of becoming a typhoon within 24 hours was moderate. Then they updated it to a medium chance of becoming just a tropical depression first.
So if it does develop, it gets the name Oring.
That's the one. First for June, first for 2025. Pagasa had actually forecast maybe 1 or 2 cyclones for June anyway.
And this LPA plus the monsoon was already bringing rain.
Yeah, the combination of the LPA and the Habagat, the southwest monsoon, was expected to dump rain on Metro Manila, Bicol, Visayas, Mindanao. Warnings were out for floods and landslides.
So this is the real start. Time for disaster agencies to be on high alert.
Absolutely. Preparedness is key now. Early warnings, getting people evacuated if needed, handling the aftermath. These first storms are always a test of the system.
And quickly, any other environmental news mentioned?
Just that item about Japan's World Expo canceling some water shows because they found Legionella bacteria. International, but environmental.
Okay, besides those big headline topics, the sources touched on a lot of other national news too. Let's quickly run through some of those. Crime and law enforcement.
The Arnal Ortivas Jr. case continued. He refused to plead on gun charges, so the court entered a not guilty for him on explosives charges. We saw photos from the arraignment.
Piogo crime, still a concern.
Definitely. Reports of arrests for kidnapping, rape, deportations of foreign nationals tied to POJOs.
And drug busts.
The key ones. Nearly 1 billion pesos worth of shabu found in western Pangasinan, and then another even larger haul, over P1.1 billion, found washed up on Pangasinan shores.
So drugs, POJO issues, organized crime, still major challenges.
Persistent issues, yeah.
Yeah.
Fuels calls for more regulation or bans, and definitely shapes how safe people feel. Other crime news included charges in the rape slay of a Slovak national, a reward for killers of a goat dealer, and a rioter robbery that ended tragically.
What about public health?
Senator Bong Go was pushing for more HIV testing due to rising cases. DOH said supplies were okay. PhilHealth sent out a reminder about their rabies benefit package. And Negros Occidental was taking precautions against Mpox.
Transportation. Infrastructure.
Big news there was President Marcos ordering a postponement of the EDSA rehab project. Wants more studies done, wants to lessen the impact on commuters and the economy first.
Anything regional.
Ilocos Norte launched its first electric vehicle charging hub, and Baguio City started doing online work permit applications.
Legal and judicial developments.
The Sandiganbayan upheld the acquittal of Enrile, Nupols, and Reyes on those plunder charges.
But wasn't there another Nupols verdict?
Yes, separate but related. She and 2 ex-officials were convicted again for graft, still part of the pork barrel scam fallout. And Comlec dismissed a disqualification case against incoming Senator Erwin Tolfo.
And finally, something about social media.
Right. The PCO chief, the head of the Presidential Communications Office, said the government needs to regulate social media platforms to fight fake news.
That sounds like it could get complicated.
Oh, yeah. It signals potential government oversight, maybe control. immediately raises flags about free expression, especially in a polarized climate. You can expect huge debates about what counts as fake news, how regulation would even work, and balancing that against basic freedoms.
Okay, so pulling all these different strands together from the week of June 2nd to 6th, it was a really intense period.
It really was. Politically, you've got this sustained uncertainty from the impeachment and the ICC investigations. How the Senate handles the trial especially is going to be watched incredibly closely and will definitely impact public trust.
And the economy. That tightrope walk between wanting higher wages and worrying about jobs, especially with those mixed labor stats right next to really low inflation, the wage bill outcome is huge.
Huge. And national security, the West Philippine Sea just remains this constant, complex challenge. Requires that careful mix of asserting rights, diplomacy, avoiding escalation, leaning on allies, because more of the same push and pull there.
And environmentally, boom, typhoon season is here. R-ing is the immediate test for disaster preparedness. Effective response is critical right now.
And just to reiterate for everyone listening, our deep dive covers everything up to the end of Friday, June 6th, 2025. Anything from the weekend after isn't in this analysis based on the sources provided.
Wow. It really strikes you how interconnected everything is. Politics affects the economy, international issues affect security, the weather affects everyone. It all happened at once this week.
It's never just one thing, is it? They all influence each other. What happens in the Senate influences how confident businesses or consumers feel. Global events shape local security decisions.
Which leaves us with a final thought maybe for you to chew on. In a time like this, when you see major domestic institutions like the Senate being tested, international bodies like the ICC facing pressure, and the government juggling tough economic choices and security threats all at once, how strong are those institutions, really? And how much does public confidence depend on seeing leaders navigate all these complex pressures effectively at the same time?
Yeah, definitely a lot to think about there. Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the Philippines for the week of June 2nd to June 6th, 2025.
Thanks for listening.